So the title of this talk is Whatever Happened to the Woolly Mammoth? I mean, they're gone today, they're extinct, and you hear all these incredible stories up in Siberia, Alaska, the Northwest Yukon territory of Canada. So what's their story? And how does it relate to biblical Earth history? Anyway, an overview. There are many mysteries associated with the woolly mammoth, especially in Siberia. Many mysteries. It's also unexplained by mainstream scientists. And I'm going to make a case that the quick freeze theory is not likely. Evidence points to extinction at the end of the post-flood ice age. And the post-flood ice age deduced from the Bible can account for all the other subsidiary mysteries associated with the woolly mammoth and the environment of Siberia. I'll be focusing especially on Siberia, but the same could be said for the lowlands of Alaska and the lowlands of the Northwest Yukon territory that were unglaciated. Anyway, here's a woolly mammoth. It had a cousin, you might say, called the Columbian mammoth, which was a lot taller, 14 feet at the shoulders. Well, this was only about 11 feet. It had spiraling inward tusks, as you see, small ears, an adaptation to cold, a lump on its head and its back, and the back of it sloped down, and it had three types of hair. The outer hair was about 1 meter long, and it had two other types inside. But that's a woolly mammoth. Now, they try to say that the Columbian mammoth, the other mammoth in North America, was a different species, but the more I read about this, the more scientists are realizing that the same species just adapted to a different environment. Anyway, the woolly mammoth distribution is that the red areas all across the northern hemisphere, except in those white areas, the central and northern parts of the ice sheet over Canada and northern Scandinavia. That's where you don't find any woolly mammoth bones in there. And but you do in all these red areas. So the woolly mammoth was spread over much of the northern hemisphere. And this should give you a hint that the woolly mammoths are associated with the ice age, since they're not found where the ice was in the central and northern parts of the ice sheets in North America and in Europe. So we'll have a little geography lesson because I'm going to focus in on Siberia. This is color coded. The green are the low altitudes, and then it goes up to the tan and then the dark brown. So this is the Western Siberian plains, very low plains. Here's the Ural Mountains that separate Siberia from the rest of Russia, which is this part right in here. And we go especially into northeast Siberia. You can see just along the ocean there, the Arctic Ocean. It's low altitude with some mountainous areas like the Tamir Peninsula here and these mountains in here. The mountains were glaciated, the lowlands weren't. Here's the New Siberian Islands, which have a lot of mammoth fossils. In fact, this continental shelf in here off of Siberia is very shallow, so you find numerous woolly mammoth bones on the bottom of the ocean on the continental shelf in there. So most of the mammoths are found further north is where you find most of the mammoths for some reason. Anyway, I might get back to that and I may forget, but anyway, that's a geography lesson. Anyway, mammoths were cold adapted. They had long hair, unlike other types of elephants, and including the Columbian mammoth, which had shorter hairs. It's small ears, had an anal flap, and oil glands in their skin. To survive a cold climate, you need oil glands. Now, the African elephant has no oil glands, so it couldn't survive at high latitudes. And for a while, there was a question on whether they had oil glands, and they never could find them. And therefore, they said that, well, mammoths were lived in subtropical to temperate areas and not polar areas because of that. They had poor samples. They discovered their oil glands in their skin. So they did have oil glands, adaptation for cold. Now, there's a lot of mysteries associated with the woolly mammoths. And some of the major mysteries, the main Siberian mysteries, where bones and tusks are found in permafrost, which is permanently frozen ground. Permafrost. They're not found in ice. They're not found in glacial ice. But permafrost has a lot of ice in it, from ice wedges and ice lenses. In fact, some areas of the permafrost have 80 to 90% ice in them. Also, the bones and tusks are generally well preserved, which indicates they were buried rapidly somehow before they can decay much. The flesh decayed on practically all these, but the bones and tusks didn't. They're well preserved. And there's also now some frozen woolly mammoths, carcasses. And the question is how do you get a carcass into permafrost? How do you rapidly jam it into the permafrost? Well, I hope to answer that question as we go on. Also, the stomach contents in several of those woolly mammoths were half-digested plant material, which indicates they're probably frozen rapidly for that state of decay. Not totally decayed, partially decayed, half-digested. So those are some of the main Siberian mammoth mysteries, but there's other mysteries. But before I get to those, here's a quote from Henry Howarth, who wrote a book called The Mammoth and the Flood. And by the way, he wasn't talking about the Genesis flood. He was talking about a huge tsunami that swept over the area and buried the mammoths. So that was his flood. And that was his solution to the woolly mammoths. And he says, now by no physical process known to us can we understand how soft flesh could thus be buried in ground while it is frozen as hard as flint without disintegrating it. We cannot push an elephant's body into a mass of solid ice or hard frozen gravel and clay without entirely destroying the fine articulations and pounding the whole mass into jelly, nor will we fail in greatly disturbing the ground in the process. So the question is, how do they get in the permafrost? Good question. But first of all, we need to know how many woolly mammoths we talking about in Siberia. Is it just a small number, which really wouldn't be too unusual? Or are there millions, which would be a major mystery? Well, according to the experts that work in Siberia, the number is in many millions. There's many millions that are entombed in the permafrost, and their bones wash out of the Arctic Ocean every year because the Arctic Ocean erodes about 20 feet a year. So based on where they find the bones and extrapolating between, they estimate many millions. In the area of the New Siberian Islands and south on the mainland, they estimate 6 million just in that small area. So that's not all the mysteries. There's just not the woolly mammoth that lived in Siberia. There's many other animals, woolly rhinoceros, bisons, a lot of horses, and a lot of small animals, ferrets, beavers, burrowing animals, which is rather strange for permafrost. How does that enter in? How are they going to build a tunnel into permafrost? Well, maybe at the time there wasn't any permafrost. I'll get into that. Most of these animals were grazers. They ate grass. There's about 40 animals. I have a table of that that I'm working on, that I've worked on recently. Also, wildlife specialists would consider them well-dressed giants, large horns, thick hair, well-dressed, healthy. And most large mammals went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. Most of them are gone. Those others that lived there that aren't gone now live a lot further south. And what does this say about the environment of Siberia? It says it was a grassland. Since they ate grass, it was a grassland with a wide diversity of plants. When you have a wide diversity of animals with a wide diversity of needs, you end up with you have to have a wide diversity of plants. So that's one feature. To get a grassland like that, you need fertile soil, unlike the sterile bog soils that are there today. It's a bogland in the summer because of the permafrost. The top 2 feet melt and it has nowhere to drain, so it becomes a bogland with bog vegetation. Lots of greenery up there, but it's bog vegetation, which is actually toxic to grazers. It was a high quality habitat, and the competition between animals was light, and you had to have a long growing season. Boy, that's pretty radical compared to what it's like today. But there's even more deductions. This implies snowfall is light and melts early. In other words, it had a short winter season and milder, relatively dry winters. Summer bogs are rare, whereas today they're common up in Siberia. All this implies, whoa, little or no permafrost until towards the end of the ice age. Wow, that is radical to have little or no permafrost. Secular scientists think the permafrost has been there for 1,000,000 years or more. And an indication of the lack of permafrost is the distribution of the Saga antelope. It has small hooves and can't live in bog country or marsh country. It has to have open, dry plains. So here are some distributions of the Saga antelope. Here's the current distribution, the solid circle. The recent is a lot larger. Their habitat is decreasing. But during the ice age, they were in these dotted areas right up in here in central Siberia, northern Siberia, New Siberian Islands, northeast Siberia, central Alaska, northern Alaska, northwest Canada near the coast, indicating, again, reinforcing the idea that there was no permafrost early in the ice age. That's not all. You thought that might be enough mysteries, but there's a lot of mysteries. Some carcasses and skeletons are in a general standing upright position, and 5 we know suffocated by the conditions of the blood in the carcass. Also, some bones are broken. The Beresavaka mammoth had a broken leg bone, broken pelvis, broken ribs. How do you break the bones of these animals? And the New Siberian Islands are just a huge amount of bones on them. And I'm not going to answer the reason for that because I don't have time, but I'll just say one thing. It's because sea level was rising quickly in the New Siberian Islands, which were actually hills with a lower sea level late in the ice age. When the sea level rose quickly, they would head for the highlands, and there's some high areas on these islands. So that's why there's a huge amount of animals that ended up on the New Siberian Islands and had nowhere to go and died there. And the lowlands not glaciated. These are more mysteries. Anyway, here's some quotes about all this. Brandt was an early Siberian explorer. Brandt was very much impressed by the fact that remnants of the mammoths, both carcasses and skeletons alike, sometimes were found in poses which indicated that the animal had perished standing upright as though they had they sunk in a bog. Unfortunately, a lot of the sediments around these mammoths are not bog sediments. I mean, I can see how they would get that idea. And probably some did sink in bogs, but a lot of them didn't because they don't have bog sediments around the carcass or the skeleton. And that's from Tolmachov, Transaction of the American Philosophical Society, 1929. And here's the Beresavaka mammoth. That was found in northeast Siberia in the Beresavaka River. And that's the position that it was entombed in. It was mostly frozen carcass. It was damaged when they found it. And to get it out of Siberia, they had to cut it up and take it by sledges from northeast Siberia down to southern Siberia, catch the railroad back to St. Petersburg in the fall, early winter. Can you imagine doing that? Anyway, this is the general pose of this mammoth. And here's a Sellerkin horse and Dale Guthrie's idea of how it ended up in a general standing position. This is how they found it. In a gold mine, its hooves were sticking out from the roof of a cave. So that's where they put their light. So they decided to excavate it and decided, and no, they didn't decide, but they discovered it had no head. So what's it doing in a general standing position with no head? Well, here's what they think. It's got stuck in a bog and sunk in a cave lion. Yes, cave lions lived up there at the time, and ate off its head. And the whole thing was covered by more debris. And so that's how it ended up. That's what they think. Now, it could be bog vegetation around this one. I don't know in the particulars, but most of these carcasses are not surrounded by bog sediments. And the sediments are the key to solving the many mysteries of the woolly mammoths, as I will get into soon. So woolly mammoth extinction is a major mystery of mainstream earth science. It's a major mystery. A few quotes. Peter Oard, The Call of the Distant Mammoths, 1997, said, "This great extinction, truly a mass extinction," that's at the end of the last ice age, including the mammoths, "represents one of paleontology's most fundamental mysteries." Larry Agenbrod and Lisa Nelson in the book Mammoths said, "Why did the mammoths disappear from Earth? This question remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the past." So it's a big mystery. Can they solve it? Can we solve it? They say we can't solve anything with our worldview. Well, I beg to differ with them. Anyway, there's three categories of mammoth extinction hypotheses. The uniformitarian, which is present processes over millions of years, and the climate generally the same as today. And then we have a group called the non-creationist catastrophes, which some of you may have heard of and some may not, but regardless, I am not going to talk about them for lack of time. But they had some wild ideas like the poles shifting from the tropics to the poles and they suddenly froze, things of this sort. And then there are us, creationist catastrophes. And we're divided into three groups. There's those that believe a quick freeze early in the flood. That's Walter Brown in his model, that they died early in the flood from a quick freeze. Number two, there was a quick freeze at the end of the post-flood rapid ice age. And number C, a slow to moderate freeze at the end of the post-flood rapid ice age. So the only difference between B and C is how fast they froze. So the question is, did we have a quick freeze? And another question is, where did they get buried? Are they in flood sediments or are they in what we'd call ice age sediments? Well, we'll explore those ideas. But first of all, we'll talk about the uniformitarian hypotheses just very briefly. I think they're kind of clueless because they're stuck in uniformitarianism and can't think outside the box. They sometimes downplay the number of mammoths, thinking there's not a huge amount up there, so it's no big deal. They admit it may be a little warmer during an interglacial. Well, that won't help. That would just reinforce the summer bogs. And in their ice age, it's much colder during the glacial phase. And so maybe if everything's totally frozen, they won't get stuck in these bogs. But what would they eat? They eat a lot. They drink a lot too. The mammoths do. And here's a quote from the journal Science, the second most widely read journal in the world from North America. William Ferrand says, "The woolly mammoth data can be adequately explained by the everyday processes which we can observe around us." Oh yeah? How do you get a lack of permafrost in that climate? Permafrost forms from the ground down because of cold winter temperatures. If you don't have cold winter temperatures, you don't have permafrost. But how are you going to get warm enough temperatures in the Siberian winter to not have permafrost? See, that's the problem for them, that is. So there's three main problems with uniformitarian ideas. First of all, why would mammoths and those 40 other types of mammals want to live in Siberia today? If it's like today, because the winters are bitterly cold and dark and it's a bogland in summer. They can hardly get around. Also, what would they eat? There's no green vegetation in northern Siberia until July, and bog vegetation is toxic. The vegetation's frozen for 9 months, so what are they going to eat? And how did they die and become buried in permafrost? I don't think they've come close to answering this question. So they're stuck after probably 200 years. They noticed these clear back in the early 1800s. George Cuvier had an idea in the early 1800s. In fact, he invented the quick freeze idea. And if you understand what an elephant eats today, you can understand what the problem of what they're going to eat and drink. This is what an average elephant eats a day: 400 to 650 pounds of feed a day, 35 to 50 gallons of water. So where are you going to get that in Siberia during the Ice Age? So, and the opinion of 2 Russian experts said there would be no place for mammoths in the present Arctic tundra of Eurasia with its dense snow driven by the winds. They couldn't live up there. And they really haven't taken it much further than that. I don't see any of them doing any much research. They do research on the mammoth carcasses they do find, but the conclusions, they haven't taken any conclusions very far. Anyway, like I said, there's 3 categories of extinction ideas or models by us creation scientists. Yes, in some areas we have different ideas, and there's nothing wrong with that. In the principle of multiple working hypotheses, it's good to have several ideas going at the same time, especially when there's a lot unknown. Anyway, I'm going to start addressing 2 things here. Did they die early in the flood? And secondly, did they die in a quick freeze, whether it's at the end of the flood or early in the flood? Or I should say at the end of the Ice Age or early in the flood. Anyway, here's a schematic. When they think of a quick freeze or early in the flood, they have woolly mammoths peacefully eating buttercups in a temperate climate, and suddenly massive cold dumps on them. So, but this cold was developed, according to Walter Brown, who's the only advocate of this theory, by the way, early in the Ice Age by jets shooting way up into the atmosphere and outer space and freezing and then coming down on top of them in this area. That's his idea. But if that was the case, why are mammoths part of a post-flood northern hemisphere steppe community? A steppe's a grassland area. And during the Ice Age, that areas not glaciated were a grassland, part of a steppe community. And they wouldn't be part of that community if they died very early in the flood. Also, why are they generally absent in glaciated areas? Also, they're drawn on cave walls in the Ural Mountains, which divide Western Siberia from the rest of Russia. And if cavemen drew them on cave walls, they must have seen them after the flood. Also, the bones of woolly mammoths are on top of glacial debris in northwest Siberia. In other words, they died after the ice sheet retreated from northwest Siberia. And they're found in surface sediments in the permafrost at the top, not way down deep in the bottom of flood sediments where they should be. And there are thick flood sediments in places in Siberia, as well as coal and carbonates and other types of rocks you find all over in other continents. So I think it's pretty obvious they did not die early in the flood. And of course, there's that woolly mammoth distribution where they're not found in the central and northern parts of where it was glaciated, like in North America and Scandinavia, which strongly implies that they're not associated with, that they are associated with the Ice Age. And here's a little cartoon from the book Life in the Great Ice Age, drawing woolly mammoths on cave walls. Woolly mammoths were a common art form in caves in Europe, and this one in the Ural Mountains depicted here. And there's evidence against the quick freeze. First of all, you got to keep it in context. The number of carcasses that would be frozen is relatively small. It's probably less than 100. Less than 100, and a lot of them aren't even whole carcasses. In fact, the way some of them define a carcass is any scrap of flesh, soft flesh, that's to be defined as a carcass. There's less than 100. The millions of them bones that are there, they're bones. They decayed gradually like normal decay, and therefore the exotic ones, the carcasses, have special conditions that we need to explain, but the vast majority died natural deaths and were buried. Also, the carcasses are not preserved well. If there's a quick freeze, dumping snow and ice on them and preserving them, you would have no decay or very little decay, but these carcasses are partially decayed. Also, flies had a chance to lay eggs in these carcasses. And so fly pupae associated with the bones and carcasses indicated that they weren't suddenly died and buried in a quick freeze, but they were probably buried in a moderate freeze. Also, when you check the vegetation in their stomach, you find out that that vegetation is from different seasons. When they died, the vegetation's from sometimes summer, winter. So in a quick freeze, they die all at once in the same season at the same time. Now, the stomach contents itself are a partial mystery. And I think there's that can be explained, which I'll get to soon. But there are stomach contents partly preserved in U.S. mastodons that died in peat bogs in the Northeast United States. You find stomach contents that are partially preserved, and if you find them there in the Northeast United States, well, it's not such a special thing to have partially decayed vegetation in the stomachs of these carcasses, half decayed in Siberia. So all these kind of militate against a quick freeze. So how can the post-flood ice age account for the mammoth mysteries? So we determined that it's during the ice age and they died towards the end. First of all, the populations would have to increase rapidly. That's going to take time. So by the time they got up into Siberia, it's probably mid-ice age, and things are changing. The ice age climate was very dynamic, starting off with mild winters and cool summers, and then as it got to the end, they were very cold winters and actually a little warmer summers. Anyway, here's a quick summary of the requirements for an ice age. You have to have cooler summers, greater snowfall, and has to persist for many years. And here's the general scheme of the ice age before we get into how the woolly mammoths in Siberia, how they lived, why they lived there, and why they died. Warm ocean, great evaporation, volcanic dust reflecting sunlight back to space, and snow and sleet ending up on the cold land. That's the general ice age model in one schematic. Also, the Genesis flood fulfills the requirements. You had a lot of volcanic dust and aerosols just from the end of the flood, and then replenish during the ice age, causing cooler summers over land. The fountains of the great deep and volcanism would cause the warm oceans, which supply a lot more water vapor for the ice sheets, and also I might add a lot more water vapor for non-glaciated areas for heavy rain in a lot of spots. And the mechanism would persist, but wane with time as the oceans cooled and the volcanism decreased. And here's the general location of where the ice occurred. Notice the lowlands of Alaska were not glaciated, just the mountains. The same situation in Siberia. Lowlands not glaciated, but the mountains were. And the time to reach glacial maximum, about 500 years. The ice sheet was about 2,300 feet in the northern hemisphere, 4,000 in Antarctica. It would take from 70 years near the edge, the periphery, to melt, 200 years in the interior, for a total time of about 700 years. And when we focus the ice age on the Arctic Ocean and Siberia, we find out why the winters would be warmer. A man did a computer study where he took the ice off of the Arctic ice cap. It's just a cap of ice, took it off, but left it at the freezing point of seawater, which is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. And then he found out how much warmer was the atmosphere in winter. And this is in centigrade, by the way. Over the North Pole, it was 40 degrees centigrade warmer in winter. Whoa. 30 degrees there. Northern Siberia, 20 degrees centigrade warmer. That's keeping the temperature of the Arctic Ocean water at freezing. But what if the Arctic Ocean started at 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees centigrade? These temperatures would be a lot warmer in winter. So winters would be a lot warmer in that area. Summers would be cool because of the volcanic ash and aerosols. And by the way, with these warmer winters, this would allow animals to migrate through Asia down into Alaska and North America, Central America, and South America a lot easier if it's not so cold in the winter. Anyway, with a warm Arctic Ocean, you have warm onshore flow, sort of like in the climate in Vancouver, British Columbia, where you have warm onshore flow of Pacific air that gives you all that nice rain, which I'm glad to not live in. Sorry about that. Anyway, so you have a lot of onshore flow to keep Alaska and Siberia warm in the winter. So another question we need to answer before we get into the why they died and how they died. Is there enough time to produce many millions of mammoths at the end of the ice age? Is there enough time? They say there's millions of them there. And if you include the mammoths in North America and in Eurasia, Europe, you probably had maybe 50 million mammoths spread around the whole northern hemisphere. Well, I went to several, read research reports and several preserves in Africa at the doubling time for elephants. I'm going to focus in on this one. In one preserve, and these aren't ideal preserves because there is poaching that goes on, they doubled in 10 years in this one preserve. And at that rate, you'd have 1.3 billion in 300 years if there's no death. Of course, there'd be death, but still, you'd have a huge amount in a short time, several hundred years. So there's no trouble getting many millions of mammoths in 700-year ice age. And here's the postulated Siberian temperatures with time. Like I was saying, at the beginning, at the end of the flood, the winters would be quite warm and the summers cool. So there'd be little seasonal contrast. In fact, that's why we have warm climate and cold climate animals living together. It's because there was little seasonal contrast early in the ice age. But as time went on, less volcanism, cooler ocean temperatures, the temperatures would cool and the winters would become even colder than today. And the summers would warm up. So, and it was during this time that the woolly mammoths went extinct. As far as precipitation, because of the warm ocean, the evaporation, you have heavy precipitation in many areas of the globe early in the flood. Then it tail off as the oceans cooled. You have less evaporation, and it would tail off to the point where you got even less evaporation, more sea ice than you do now. And with time, it came back up to what it is today. So at the end of the ice age, you'd have a period of a lot drier, colder winters, and a lot stronger winds. And here's the permafrost, the postulated permafrost area. Starting at zero, at the end of the flood, there's freshly laid sediments. There wouldn't have been any cold winters to cause the permafrost at the end of the flood by definition. But as time goes on and winters become cooler and cooler, eventually, starting about midway in the ice age, the permafrost would start building up and build up and build up and build up. And at the end, when it was actually colder winters than today, you'd have more permafrost. And since the end of the ice age, you had a warming trend. Just getting rid of the ice sheets should cause a warming trend. And so you'd have some melting of the permafrost. And that's why the permafrost in Siberia is often composed of hills, permafrost hills, and hollows where it melted. The hills are called yudamas, and that's where you find most of the woolly mammoth bones and other animal bones. And here's the woolly mammoth timeline, starting off probably from two elephants leaving the ark. On those elephants, God created a huge amount of diversity within the genes and chromosomes. And from there, they diversified to mastodons and mammoths and your elephants you see today, and other types of elephants that are extinct in the ice age. Yeah, there were other types of elephants. But anyway, but they'd start slow. They'd diversify, and they would double every 10 years. And soon their populations would mushroom and become many millions. And the climate would become colder, drier, and windy. And all those conditions caused them to go quickly extinct by about the end of the ice age. That's the woolly mammoth timeline. And here's how animals would diverge from the mountains of Ararat, coming over the Bering Land Bridge and down an ice-free corridor east of the Rocky Mountains, clear down into South America. That's how the animals, and there'd be no trouble going through Siberia with the warmer winters. A lot of animals that can't handle much cold can easily make it through on the Bering Land Bridge. And the Bering Sea is pretty shallow. And so this is kind of what an idea of them coming like this, spreading around where the ice occurred in the mountains and spreading down the east slopes of the Rockies that were kept ice-free for quite a while, early and mid-ice age, because of the downslope Chinook winds that occur east of the Rocky Mountains. So let's cut to the chase, get to the big question. How did the woolly mammoths die in Siberia? How did they die? Well, I believe the solution to the mystery of their extinction and death is found in the deposits surrounding the mammoth. Remember, I hinted at this. What kind of material are they buried in? Okay, to find that out, and by the way, I researched this 2 different times, spending a major effort both times. And the first time I never figured it out, and the second time I believe I did. But I went to the experts that told me what kind of sediment they're buried in. Well, 2 Russian scientists said this: a particular interest for paleozoologists is the Yodama. They're the ones that study the Ice Age mammals. This is actually a loess layer, as a rule, containing the largest amount of remains of late Pleistocene animals. A loess layer, that's windblown silt. They're predominantly buried in windblown silt. Aha, that presents an idea of how they can die at the end of the post-flood ice age. And Dale Guthrie, who I think is the closest secular scientist to understanding this, he wrote a book called Frozen Fauna of the Mammoth Steppe, 1990. And he says this about what's called Beringia, which includes Eastern Siberia, Alaska, and the Yukon. He says, like most of the Soviet Far East, large expanses of Alaska and the Yukon Territory were not glaciated during the Pleistocene. Because these areas were bounded on several sides by enormous glaciers and glacial outwash streams, today much of Beringia is mantled with a thick deposit of aeolian windblown silt called loess. In some places in Siberia, it's over 100 feet thick. So windblown silt, okay. Well, why would you, they're buried in dust storms, essentially. Dust storms. Well, why would there be late ice age dust storms? Well, colder winters, colder oceans, more sea ice, resulting in a drier atmosphere. And because of the colder winters and the tropics warming up, the north-south temperature difference would be a lot greater, and this drives the winds aloft of the jet stream, and so you'd have strong cold fronts with a lot of wind and a lot of blowing dust. So to do more research on this, I looked at some of the Dust Bowl era photographs from the Midwest of the United States in the 1930s. And how would you like that approaching you? Probably the winds would be calm ahead of it. Ahead of a cold front, a lot of times it is fairly calm. And then suddenly you have this big wall of dust. And it gets into your house, it goes through cracks. It's pretty nasty, I hear. And anyway, I believe these dust storms can account for why bones and tusks were buried rapidly after and during the undergoing natural decay. See, you had average type dust storms that maybe deposited maybe 5 inches of dust in one dust storm. So these would cover up the bones and tusks as they were rotting or after they rotted. And so you can bury them and keep them well preserved. Also, as you pile up dust thick, you end up with the bones and even the carcasses in the permafrost, because the permafrost is forming at the same time, and it forms from the top down. And if you cover it with dust, the permafrost would cool the freshly laid dust and cool it from above and from the cold from top. So you would be freezing this dust almost as immediately as it piled up. So this is why the bones and tusks end up in the permafrost well preserved. So it solves a reasonable solution for these mysteries. And some of these dust storms were monstrous. During the Dust Bowl era, you had dust drifts 10 feet tall from one dust storm, covering up houses and machinery and fences. And based on this model here, you can understand how we can get some of the more exotic mysteries, why they're in a standing position, some of them, why some of them suffocated, because they're buried in huge dust drifts like this, and they breathed in the dust and suffocated, and they got caught in the dust like they're a snow fence, and the dust piles up around them. They can't move. They try to get themselves out. They can shatter their leg bones trying to get out. And so they suffocate in a general standing position in these monstrous dust storms, which would have occurred. So it accounts for why some are stuck in a standing position in the dust drift, why they'd suffocate in the dust, and why some carcasses would freeze at a moderate rate, not a quick freeze, but a moderate rate, because the dust would be cooled from below and above at the same time as they suffocated. And evidence for suffocation by dust was recently provided by two two-month-old baby woolly mammoths found 5,000 kilometers apart. They died of asphyxia or suffocation. And they found out that mud, they call it mud, packed in their mouth, their trunk, the oral cavity, and the lungs. And trying to explain that all that was, they really had to step over themselves to explain it. And boy, it came out a mess. But this would easily be described as breathing in windblown silt, dying of breathing that dust and being asphyxiated. So we can account for all but two mysteries. But I think it can even account for two that are still left. How is the half-decayed stomach vegetation explained? And how are the broken bones explained? Well, I went to this book, Gary Haynes' Mammoths, Mastodons, and Elephants. He indicated that the digestive system of an elephant, which is similar to a woolly mammoth, is quite different than what you think. He says the digestive system is based on what's called post-gastric, that is hindgut fermentation. In other words, the actual digestion occurs after the stomach. The stomach is large, but serves mainly to store ingested food. Enzymes within the stomach partly break down the vegetation. That's why it's half decayed, because you can identify a lot of the plant remains. But most nutrients are extracted after the stomach in the huge cecum and large intestine, where microbes ferment the food remaining after gastric processing. It's the digestive system of these elephants and the fact that there's very little bacteria in cold climates that allow for the state of partially decayed vegetation. But how about the broken bones? Well, I went to this publication here. There's an area in South Dakota called Hot Springs where they believe there's over 100 mammoths buried in that. It's an old sinkhole. And during the drought in the northern hemisphere, towards the end of the ice age, that would probably be the only water in a sinkhole. And so mammoths would try to venture in there, fall into it, get stuck in the mud, and try to get out. And when they're trying to get out, he discovered that a lot of those bones, leg bones, are broken. And he thinks it's by two processes, which for our situation, we can eliminate number two, because this only applies to hot springs. But number one, torsional stress like this, trying to extricate a limb mired in mud, muck, or quicksand, and probably enhanced by an occasional accidental fall. In other words, they got packed by windblown silt that can pack pretty hard. And trying to get out of that, the torsional stress can break the limb bone that we observe on that Saga mammoth. Well, what about the pelvis and rib bones? How would you break a big pelvis? Well, I think this was answered by these two scientists when they said that permafrost shifts, it faults. And after burial in permafrost, the organic remains could have shifted vertically within a wide range owing to their physical properties and the features of the permafrost environment. It is now known that in frozen ground, bones and pieces of wood are sometimes shifted vertically by 10 to 15 meters along the boundary of the frozen ground and ice veins. It faults, shifts. And if you got a woolly mammoth in there, it could shift right through the pelvis and break the pelvis. So here's kind of a summary of this. The woolly mammoth, peacefully eating grass and buttercups. Yes, the reason we have buttercups is because we find the grass and buttercups in their mouth and in their stomach. And buttercups grow up there today, by the way, in Siberia. Anyway, the wind picks up. Uh-oh, a cold front's coming. I'll turn my back. And the windblown silt, the dust packs around him like he's a snow fence. Gets deeper and deeper. He breathes it, suffocates, and ends up in a general standing position in a big dust drift. Then more dust storms pile up more and more dust until he's buried, totally buried. And the permafrost, which is this blue area that has been forming at the same time, comes up like this. And it's cooling from top too, and covers them up, and then it faults, breaks the pelvis. So that's a summary of how at the end of the ice age, we had these monstrous, we had moderate dust storms that covered up the vast majority of decayed carcasses, just bones and tusks, and can account for these exotic features like a general standing position, suffocated, broken bones. All can be explained by the windblown silt or dust called loess. But there's a problem with the uniformitarians. Why can't they see the importance of this windblown silt? They're in windblown silt deposits. Why can't they see the importance of it? Because of their uniformitarian mindset. Because a dust storm in a bogland, they're almost non-existent today. And they're not going to be able to cover up anything. Dale Guthrie said, these large bones could not be preserved by a few millimeters of annual aeolian lustfall. Few millimeters is what he gives it. The preservation requires large quantities of reworked silt. You need a lot of it. And he's generous, a few millimeters a year in Siberia. It doesn't occur today, but it was very common at the end of the ice age to have monstrous dust storms there, and that they can't see because of their paradigm. They can't see the significance of the dust because of their stretched out time scale also. So time is not a side issue, but crucial for solving mysteries. How so in this case? Yeah, they believe there are some dust storms at the end of the ice age, but because they stretch the end of the ice age out to maybe 10,000 years, each dust storm is insignificant. It's not going to be able to cover up a woolly mammoth bones or tusks. So, but if you telescope it all within a few hundred years, these things become monstrous and a very strong mechanism for accounting for all the mysteries of the woolly mammoths in Siberia, as well as Alaska and the Yukon Territory. So, in summary, the post-flood rapid ice age accounts for the lowlands of Siberia not glaciated. I never got into that, but there's good reason for that. And I gave a hint, winters would be a lot warmer there. Also, why mammoths would live in Siberia, because it was a grassland, and there'd be an abundance of food in Siberia. And even in Siberia, there's a mix of warm and cold climate animals. They call disharmonious associations there. And it tells how the mammoths and other animals went extinct. They died at the end of the ice age in Siberia in particular due to dust storms, but other places due to drought and strong winds and other features. So it explains all the Siberian mysteries. Conclusion. Reasonable explanations for the many mammoth mysteries are provided by the post-flood rapid ice age. This ice age is a climatic consequence of Noah's flood. This supports the Bible and is against the present processes over millions of years alternative secular model. So if you want to know more about it, this is my main popular level book, Frozen in Time, The Woolly Mammoths, the Ice Age, and the Biblical Key to Their Secrets. Yeah. And if you want to learn more about the Ice Age, we have a story form, a scene from the eyes of a 12-year-old boy living in a cave. There's your caveman, but he wasn't dumb. They were very smart. They have to be extremely smart to live in that environment, first of all, smarter than us. Also, they have an interaction with Neanderthal man, which is just a type of man that lived during the Ice Age, just a group of people like many other people groups over the world. And so they have a fun interaction during the summer in a story form, teaching all the time about Ice Age, Caveman, Neanderthal man. And the sequel, which especially is pertinent to this talk, is uncovering the mysterious woolly mammoth life at the end of the Great Ice Age. And if you want to, if you're hung up about the millions of years, there's a lot more to the story. Get the book, The Deep Time Deception, Examining the Case for Millions of Years. And I'm going to leave you with these websites as I end. And I want to emphasize creation.com that has 12,000 articles for various ages and various scientific abilities on it. You have to do a search to find articles. Like if you do a search on dinosaurs, you might get 500 of them. Lots of articles on dinosaurs because people are really interested in dinosaurs. There's articles on mammoths. A lot of my articles can be found there too. But anyway, it's a great resource, especially if someone asks you, where did Cain get his wife? It's amazing that most Christians can't answer that, but as a simple answer, you can get on creation.com and answers to many, many other questions. So I thank you, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you so much, Mike. Fascinating. Bet many people didn't know about all these interesting facts of these animals, the woolly mammoth in particular, but not just that, but the Bible can explain all these mysteries. When we start from the Bible, what would have happened to the mammoths after the flood that caused the ice age, I should say. Maybe as questions come trickling in, we'll get to one question that wasn't answered in the previous talk. It's maybe not quite so directly related, but someone had asked if you have any insight into Revelation 6:14, where it says the sky receded like a scroll rolling up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. And see also Isaiah 34:4, all the stars of the heavens will be dissolved, and the sky rolled up like a scroll.
Okay, I'll tell you right off the bat, that's out of my area of expertise, but I do read and think about those things. I think during the tribulation, we're going to have massive earthquakes. So you're going to shake things up and move things around from their place. There must be massive earthquakes to do that. And then as far as something about
This, I guess, sky
sun,
rolled up. Yeah, stars of the heavens will be dissolved in the sky rolled up like a scroll. I guess sky receding like a scroll, rolling up.
yeah, I'm not sure what that means. I kind of lean towards the idea that we're going to have a lot of nuclear exchanges dealing with the tribulation. That's my idea. After all, it says between the four horsemen of the apocalypse, 1/4 of the world's population dies, and then another third dies at the end. That's half the world population. And some of the terminology sounds like nuclear holocaust. So that's what I would lean towards. But I'm speculating there, and I better not say anything more.
Well, thank you for that. I'll be sure to pass it on to the person. So here's another one. How do you explain the history of Goliath the giant in the Bible? Was it a DNA segment inherited from one of Noah's daughters-in-law? Could it be related to the Sasquatch Bigfoot legend in North American European folklore? It's quite a bit there.
Okay. Yeah, that's a couple questions in one. As far as Sasquatch, they claim they see him all over the place now in the mountains of Montana, Washington, Oregon. In fact, I think it originated in Washington State. And at least in Montana, we have so many hunters out on opening day. They cover practically every square foot of land. You would think they would find one and accidentally shoot it or find the bones, and you don't. There's no trace of this sort of thing. So I think it's like I'm trying to think of the analogy, other things where I think sum up, I think it's a mythology, the Sasquatch idea. But anyway, what was the first part of the question?
Yeah, I guess I don't know what exactly, like Goliath, maybe giants in the Bible. Is it DNA segment inherited from one of Noah's daughters-in-law?
Yeah, this gets into the Nephilim and that sort of thing, and I'm going to stay clear of that. Things I don't know a lot about, I tend to stay clear of. I can speculate.
Yeah,
but
I guess like maybe I don't know if he's getting at, is the climate so much better that would be, or Neanderthal could be these giants? I don't know what the question is trying to get on.
I don't think so. We have over 100 Neanderthal skeletons, and they're a little shorter, but they're stockier individuals.
Or the climate.
Giants, but see, Goliath, I think, was 6 cubits high, 9 feet.
And the span.
Yeah. There were other giants in Canaan at the time. They were called the Anax or the Anakim.
And Anakim. Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Something like that. And all I can figure, it was probably a variety of people that could live like that. We don't have the genes now because no one's like that. I mean, we have people that accidentally are 8 feet tall or something because of some genetic defect, but no one that would be a warrior like that's over 9 feet tall. But it's possible to have a variation in the early gene pool right after the flood that would that you could have these people in some areas. That'd be my guess on it.
So this one might be a bit of a challenging question. How or could snow and dust storms embed shrapnel sometimes found in mammoth tusks?
Yeah, what's called the Extinction Theory by meteorite impact. That from this impact, and I believe it's supposed to be around the Great Lakes, but I think it changes. The idea is that the ice melted and these animals went extinct because of a meteorite impact, and shrapnel got embedded in the tusks of mammoths. I have a whole file on that I haven't looked at for well over a year or two, and so I'm pretty rusty on the idea. Not too many secular scientists believe it, and I think that the shrapnel is probably a local thing, but I can't say any more about it. It's an intriguing idea, and there's some secular scientists that believe it and are pushing. I thought it was dead about 8 years ago because I read an article on that in the secular literature, but then lo and behold, a year or two later, I find more articles that are extolling it. So it wasn't dead; it was just considered dead by these researchers. So I don't know what the status of that is. From what I can sum up, is it has problems, but it has evidence too. So
I guess this was from the non-creationist catastrophists would be proposing or looking into this. Is that?
yeah, the non-creationist catastrophes I listed are all passed away, but this would be from a new breed that's trying to account for some of these mysteries, like the extinction of all these animals at the end of their last ice age. 2/3 over 100 pounds globally went extinct. That is quite an effect, and so I think that's what they're trying to do. And they have other evidence at some of these archaeological sites that I've read, but they have to date these things at the precise time, and I think that all those dates are kind of questionable to really be able to be that precise. And so I don't know. I think it's in fact, I might be right. Someone I think wanted me to write an article summarizing it and down the road, and I might do that. So, but I'm pretty rusty on a lot of the details. I know just enough to get in trouble on that issue.
Yeah, this is a good follow-up question because somebody asked about the non-creationist catastrophes. Can you share more about some of these theories? I think Velikovsky is quite a popular one.
Velikovsky.
Just maybe because people would come across it and maybe what's wrong with it, or like why is it so
He's the
far-fetched?
most popular. Yeah, Velikovsky wrote 3 books: Ages in Chaos about archaeology, Earth in Upheaval about all the mysteries on the Earth, and a book, astronomy book. I can't think of the name of it.
He proposed like starting from the Bible as somewhat historical and
Somewhat historical.
Yeah.
And he thought that like the parting of the Red Sea, the flood, things can be explained naturally. I don't believe he even believed in God. I think he was an atheist, and he's trying to. He thought that in what he called mythology that there was some grain of truth in this, so he tried to explain it. And his main thesis is that you had I think Mars and Venus that were running loose in the solar system, and I forgot which one came close to the Earth, and maybe more times, and caused all these catastrophes that are correlated with biblical catastrophes. That's his main thesis. And then he goes to the Earth in Upheaval, which I've read twice. And when I read it the second time, after forgetting practically everything in it, I discovered that all these mysteries he brought up, and by the way, the woolly mammoths was the chief mystery he brought up, they can be explained by the post-flood rapid ice age and the flood. Both of them can account for practically all those mysteries that Velikovsky brought up. In fact, he was good at bringing up mysteries. It was just his solutions that were questionable. And I think the mammoths, he had them, the crust shifting or something on the mantle or something like that due to this close flyby of either Mars or Venus. And then these planets get into a stable orbit, which from celestial mechanics is extremely difficult to put it in the solar system where we see it if they did this. So his astronomical ideas are outlandish from celestial mechanics, so his ideas, his theories are not correct. But I think the data he brought up in the Earth are really good, but I believe we can explain them by the flood and the ice age. I amazed myself after forgetting all about it. Said, yeah, we can explain this. So Anyway, he's one of the four I mentioned, and he's probably the most popular one, Immanuel Velikovsky, and he got persecuted a lot by his fellow scientists. I think he last published in the 1960s or 1950s, I guess, but 2 generations away.
All right. It's quite interesting. Yeah, probably people should instead read your books. Here's a question. You may have answered this, but someone that came in late. Are there any mammoth remains in British Columbia that you know of?
Oh yeah, there are. I think there's some around Vancouver, BC, and there's not a lot, but there's one that's really interesting that I've written an article about it that will be published in the next Journal of Creation. It's that you find a woolly mammoth skeleton northwest of Prince George, and the skeleton's below the Ice Age debris from the Cordilleran ice sheet that covered your province. And so what's a Columbian mammoth doing down there? And they're in there, and supposedly they live further south than the woolly mammoths. You find them clear down to Costa Rica, by the way, in southern United States, but the range of them overlap. Well, I've indicated by that, and also they find a bison skeleton in there too. What are they doing in the center of the Cordilleran ice sheet? Well, here's how it has an easy solution. I believe that the animals rounded the Bering Land Bridge early in the Ice Age, because early in the Ice Age, Siberia winters would be a lot warmer. You'd have an ice-free corridor for them to come down into the southern United States, Central America, and South America. And so these animals rounded, including the Columbian mammoth. And how he got into British Columbia, he went through the Peace River water gap. There's a water gap there in the Central Rocky Mountains where early in the Ice Age, when the ice was building only in the mountains of British Columbia, you see. And then it took time to get down into the lowlands. So he came through the Peace River water gap early in the Ice Age after rounding the Bering Land Bridge, coming through Alaska, and got into that Central Bree Sea area. And there he got stuck because ice was forming in the mountains, and he's no way for him to get out of there. And finally he died, and the ice covered him up. And then as it melted, he was below the glacial debris. So that's one interesting mammoth that's found in British Columbia that has a lot to say just on its location. So there are a few. They're especially found in the northern United States and Alaska, Washington State. They're found in the, especially in the western United States, or in the eastern United States, you find more mastodons, the American mastodon, than you do mammoths, but you do find mammoths there too. So that's kind of a long answer. But
yeah. I guess I have a question. Like, when do you think would be the latest people and animals could have crossed that Bering Strait?
Well, during the mid part of the Ice Age, it becoming colder. And so it'd be very difficult. And by the way, the ice-free corridor would fill in on the east slopes of the Rockies, Alberta and Montana, caused by the Chinook downslope winds. The Cordilleran ice sheet from the Rockies and British Columbia and the Laurentide coming from the east, they'd eventually fill in midway and late in the Ice Age. So animals and man had to get through there early in the Ice Age. And man was held up at least 100 years in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley and the Tower of Babel incident. But then after that, they probably spread rapidly and crossed the Bering Land Bridge and down the ice-free corridor to become the Native Americans. So, yeah, actually, I'm in the process of publishing a large book that summarizes practically all my Ice Age material plus new material that some of this stuff I've already told you is in. It's being reviewed right now and be published. Things are slow, and 2 years or so. So a lot of these questions will be answered that I haven't answered before in that book 2 years down the road.
Look forward to that. Here's a thinking challenging question. Could earlier dust storms have destroyed the mammoth's food supply before the peak of the Ice Age? I guess how local would they have been to a start, I think, but could the earlier dust storms have destroyed the food source?
Well, I don't think you had too many dust storms early in the ice age because
Mhm.
it would probably start off fairly wet climate because of that onshore flow of moist air. Trees probably grew at the start. Then midway in the ice age, after the Scandinavian ice sheet built up some, you'd have kind of a downslope foam effect in there, and you'd be tending to dry out more, so become more of a grassland then. But I think the climate would be a little bit too wet
Mhm.
still for a lot of dust storms. You really need cold, dry, windy weather, and that wouldn't be significant until the end of the ice age, while the mountains, snow, and ice sheets were melting in Siberia and Alaska. So I don't think you'd have much for dust storms until the
Mhm.
very end.
Right. Hey, so here's a question that's quite a bit loaded into it. See if we can untangle. Do you feel that Joshua's longest day, the day that the Earth reeled to and fro like a drunkard, played into immediate ice formation that would instantly form around the woolly mammoth? For the Earth to be tilted in its orbit for 24 hours would imply that it had been hit by some massive meteorites, that there were lots of imprints, and there are lots of imprints to imply such impacts would have caused massive dust clouds and massive immediate ice formations.
There's a lot of questions in that question.
Yeah.
Uh, how do I begin? Start me with the first question.
Yeah, do you feel that Joshua's longest day, I guess when he's fighting the Amalekites, I think it is, played into immediate ice formation that would instantly form around the woolly mammoth? I guess, and the person's
Okay,
trying
if
to
I
say,
recall Joshua's longest day, is that where Moses had his hands lifted up
no,
and they
I
held his hands up?
oh no, I think he's referring to when Joshua told the sun to stand still and the moon. Um,
Okay. I personally think that that's a local miracle and did not apply to the whole world. Um, but that's my personal feeling. But I can be wrong. And if it did apply to the whole world, it would cause more than what he's thinking. I
hmm,
mean, if we suddenly stop the Earth from rotating, what do you think that would do? That would cause a lot of catastrophes around, and more than dealing with the woolly mammoths, it would. I haven't even thought of it much because I don't think that's what happened. But it would be a huge catastrophe globally, not just for where the woolly mammoths lived, if that ever happened.
hmm.
So anyway, that's the first part of that tough question.
Yeah,
Questions. So what are the other
yeah,
parts?
implying that, yeah, that trying, I guess the person implies a solution or how that would have happened naturally is for it to tilt its orbit for 24 hours. But yeah, like you say, would have, and then uh, in order to even do that, you need massive meteorites, I guess.
Tilt the orbit. Well, you need a powerful force to have done that,
Well, and then to move it back, I guess.
and then to move it back,
Or I don't know if
yeah.
you need to. Yeah.
Um, and why? What would this solve?
Yeah, I
He's
guess the
trying to think of
person's.
a way you can do in the woolly mammoths.
I guess do when a meteorite, I guess massive ones, impact Earth, do they blow up a lot of dust? My understanding is they create shot like so intense heat that they create I don't know, like
Oh,
rock.
they'll do debris. You have huge chunks of rock
Mhm,
and other things, and they probably would throw up a lot of dust
mhm,
up high, but it wouldn't be necessarily windblown dust. It's a surface phenomenon. Um, it would be, and you can usually it cause melting of rock, and you'd find spheres of molten rock in this material. You can tell the difference. And this is like windblown silt you find on 10% of the earth is covered by windblown silt, like the Midwest of the United States, Eastern Washington. I don't think that's windblown silt except the top there. And much of Europe, southern Europe, south of the ice sheet, and into Siberia area has the windblown silt. So if it's done from a meteorite, it would kind of fall all over the place.
Yeah, I guess would it be the same as what volcanoes do and put it into the stratosphere where it
Yes.
creates ice from it, like, or I guess.
Yeah, you'd end up knocking the stratosphere, but you probably need a pretty good impact. And as far as we know, the impact they claim that wiped out the animals at the end of the ice age was not a very big one, at least from what I've read. But what they're talking about, if you need a monstrous impact to really do much damage to the earth, and so anyway, that's a tough question, and I hope I answered a few parts of that.
Okay, someone's asking, can you speak more about caveman and how it relates to biblical history?
Oh, caveman. Yeah, after they left the Tower of Babel area and they went northwest, any metal tools they had quickly wore out, so they were stuck using stone tools, and the weather was so bad that the best places to live would be caves. And but to survive up there, up in Europe, you'd have to be pretty intelligent. So these weren't the caveman, as secular scientists try to say, half ape, half men. And like they did with Neanderthal man, which now we know is just a type of man. He had a slightly bigger brain than modern people, by the way. And so because of the ice age, the weather, it'd be a great place to live in a cave. Protection from animals, saber-toothed tigers, things like this that were around. And he used stone tools. So that was your caveman. He was essentially Ice Age man, is what you can say, after they spread out from the Tower of Babel.
Great. So I think, yeah, we're getting close to the 1.5 hour mark. So if there aren't any more questions, including at the church, you could pass them on to Carl or Haslin at the back. I'd like to maybe go through just again some of the items. We have our website you want to share again, creationbc.org. Check us out. You can be put on our mailing list for upcoming events. We now have available at our store so that you can order some of the items that Mike Oard mentioned. So just type in his last name, OARD, and a lot of the resources he mentioned, except maybe that last book he's written, are available, whether it's with the Ice Age and the woolly mammoths. We have video on the Ice Age you can share, and even down for topics related to at the level for children, or if you are new to geology, this Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibbs is quite good. Being a meteorologist, he's got the weather book. If you're homeschooling, probably be a good addition. We do have the new weather book, like Mike mentioned. I think it's the new cover and the study guide for it, and other books he's co-authored, even technical, heavily technical issues like the ice cores that was mentioned. So yeah, check us out, creationbc.org, and want to thank everybody for their time, especially Mike for taking the time out, and hope God bless you with much more insight as you continue to do research to uphold the authority of God's word.
You're welcome.